Before we get into any systems of the body, we are going to talk about tissues, which the study of tissues is called histology. And our bodies have four main types of tissue. We have epithelial tissue, connective tissue, nervous tissue, and muscular tissue. Epithelium is involved with coverings of the body. Connective tissue helps with support. Nervous system helps with control. And muscle tissue helps with movement. Today we're going to focus just on epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue, or also called epithelium, is a tissue that's going to be responsible for creating the linings of our body and covering the tissues of our body. So epithelial tissue covers all free surfaces of the body. So for example, your digestive system is a tube. The inside and outside of that tube would be covered by epithelial tissue. And then epithelial tissue is also glandular tissue of the body, so it creates glands such as sweat glands. The function of epithelial tissue, there's a variety of functions depending on where in your body that particular tissue is. So protection, where you would find protection as a function for epithelial tissue would be your skin and the lining of your respiratory tract. As far as absorption, you would have the lining of the stomach and the small intestine. In your kidneys, epithelial tissue will help with filtering your blood. And then glands such as your oil glands, sweat glands, are involved with secretion as a function. Now, epithelial tissue has special characteristics that other tissues don't have. The cells of epithelial tissue fit very closely together, and they're going to form sheets. And that is in every kind of epithelial tissue except glandular epithelial tissue. There's always one free surface to epithelial tissue. We call that the apical surface. The lower surface rests on what we call a basement membrane. It's pretty much there's no structure to it really, but it's secreted by the epithelial cells and connective tissue that it would border. It is avascular, meaning there is no direct blood supply. It depends on diffusion from capillaries underneath in connective tissue below the epithelial tissue for both food and oxygen. As long as it's well nourished, meaning it's near a good blood supply, epithelial tissue regenerates fairly easily, which is good because if there is some damage, then it can kind of repair itself. So one example, and it's not really damage, would just be the friction of food or digesting food moving through your intestines. That can wear away the epithelial tissue that's there lining your intestines. So if it has a good blood supply and the tissues below it, that will be able to repair itself very easily and there won't be any problems. Now, the way that we classify epithelial tissue is to use two parts to a name, to give it a name. And the first part comes from the arrangement of the layers that the cells are in, and then the shape of the cells as well. So it's going to be simple or stratified, and that would be the first of the two-word name for different kinds of epithelial tissue. So if it is simple, that means it's just a single layer of cells, which you could see up here in this diagram. And if it is stratified, that means it's got more than one layer, which you can see right there. The second part of the name comes from the shape of the cells. So if the cells are flattened, like we see over here, we call those squamous. So if you had a single layer of flattened cells that were epithelial cells, we would call that simple squamous epithelial tissue. Next we have cuboidal, which has a cube shape to it. You can see that right here. And then columnar has a column shape to it. So again, the name is going to be two parts. The first word of the two-part name comes from the number of layers, and the second part comes from the layer of cells. So if you had stratified cuboidal, that would tell you that it is more than one layer because it's stratified, and it would tell you those cells are cube-shaped because cuboidal refers to a cube-shaped cell. Okay, we're going to go through different kinds of tissue, but that's just, or kinds of epithelial tissue, I should say, but we are going to we'll refer back to these as we talk about the types of epithelial tissue. So simple epithelia is going to be involved in absorption, secretion, and filtration. Simple squamous would be a single layer of thin squamous cells, which are the flat scale-like cells that rest on a basement membrane, and those cells are going to fit closely together. So you can see that over here. The functions for simple squamous are going to be diffusion and filtration, as well as secretion if it would be found in serous membranes in the body. Where we would find simple squamous would be in the alveoli in your lungs, those small little air sacs where diffusion occurs to get oxygen into your blood. We would have it in the walls of our capillaries, so it allows for that diffusion to happen. Nutrients and gases pass in between what's in your cells and what's in your bloodstream. And then serous membranes are going to line our ventral body cavities. So if you remember back when we reviewed body cavities, that would include your thoracic cavity, abdominal cavity, and pelvic cavity. And they cover organs that we would have in that ventral body cavity. Next, we have simple cuboidal. So again, you can see here we're going through the number of layers and then the shape. So simple is a single layer, and cuboidal would be cube-shaped cells. Because it's epithelial tissue, they rest on a basement membrane. Simple cuboidal will function for secretion and absorption. And then there's also ciliated types, meaning they have tiny hair-like projections off of the cells that help to propel mucus or reproductive cells where they need to go. We would find simple cuboidal cells in glands and the ducts associated with those glands, such as your salivary glands and then your salivary ducts that will allow saliva from the glands to pass into your mouth. You would have it in your pancreas, the walls of the kidney tubules, and the surface of the ovaries. So it would help move the egg out of the ovary and into the fallopian tubes. And then simple columnar, again, single layer, tall column-shaped cells that rest on a basement membrane. These cells will help with secretion and absorption. And there are ciliated types of simple columnar cells as well that help also propel mucus or reproductive cells. You would have these in the lining of the digestive tract from the stomach to the anus, as well as the lining of body cavities that open to the exterior of the body, such as your nasal cavity. Moving on from there, there is pseudo-stratified columnar. These cells are different heights, so it gives the appearance that it's stratified in its multiple layers, but it's really not. So that's why we call it pseudo-stratified. It's kind of like an imposter, kind of, I guess you could say. So they are not actually stratified. It just appears that way because of the different heights of the cells. These are going to help with absorption and secretion. And then we have these in the lining of our respiratory tract that have cilia that will help trap dust and debris that might enter your airway. Moving on for the function of protection now. Stratified squamous, so multiple layers of squamous or flattened cells, okay? This kind of tissue is going to have kind of multiple shapes within it. So down here at the bottom, right above the basement membrane, you would have more cuboidal cells. And then closer to the surface, it would be those flattened squamous cells. Down here, it could also be columnar. It just depends on the type of tissue. So this is going to function to protect us. You would see it in your esophagus and your mouth, as well as the outer portion of your skin. Basically, it's going to be areas that would have or experience a lot of friction. So you have multiple layers there to help protect you so they don't get worn away. Next, for, again, protection, stratified cuboidal. So multiple layers. Usually this is at least 2 layers thick. The surface cells are, in this case, a cube shape or cuboidal shape. Again, the function here is protection. These are rare. This kind of tissue is very rare in our body, but we would find it in the ducts of large glands, such as your salivary glands and the tubules in your kidneys. Still looking at protection, we have stratified columnar. These cells, again, are going to be columnar shaped. So you can see up here, they have more of a column shaped up top. And the basal cells, are the lower level of cells, can be varying sizes or shapes. It could be cuboidal, it could be squamous. Again, the function here is protection. And again, these are rare. We have these in the conjunctiva of our eye. If you've ever had pink eye is also called conjunctivitis, where it's the infection of the conjunctiva in your eye. We have it in parts of our pharynx or your throat, as well as the anus, uterus, and the urethra in males. Still sticking with that function of protection, we have transitional epithelium. This is very modified, and it's going to be stratified squamous, so multiple layers of flattened cells. These cells are unique in that they're going to allow the shape of the tissues to be changed because the cells can actually slide past each other and allow the wall of the organ that they're part of to expand. So we would have this in our urinary system, in your bladder. So if you think of how as your bladder fills with urine, it needs to expand. That kind of tissue there is going to be, again, specialized to let that expansion or stretching kind of happen. It would also be in the ureters and urethra to expand to allow urine to pass through those two structures. Moving on to the function of secretion, and this will be where we stop for today. There's a special kind of epithelial tissue that we haven't talked about. It's called glandular epithelium. So if you think of glandular, like your glands, these are going to be tissues that they'll be arranged into what we're calling a gland, but they're going to secrete a product, which we usually just call a secretion. And there's two types of glands that we have. We have endocrine glands and exocrine glands. Endocrine glands, if you think of when we did our review at the beginning or closer to the beginning of the year with the endocrine system, that's where these glands will be part of. And these glands are unique because they are not directly connected to anything. They have a connection at one point during development that duct goes away. So they are called ductless glands. And they're going to secrete hormones right into the bloodstream. So that is unique there because they don't have those glands don't have those tubes to connect them. So just by diffusion, they need to release their hormones to go into the blood, and then the blood carries those hormones around the body where they need to go. And then lastly, we have exocrine glands. These are going to keep their ducts, their tubes, and their secretions will go right to the surface of the epithelial tissue. So this would be like your sweat glands or your oil glands in your skin. Your liver is going to produce things. So if you think of like how your liver produces bile, there's a bile duct that allows the bile produced by your liver to go and be stored in the gallbladder. And then the pancreas, that also produces enzymes for digestion. So there is a pancreatic duct connecting the pancreas to the small intestine to allow those enzymes to go into your small intestine to help with digestion. So again, there are 4 types. If we just do a quick review from the beginning, there are 4 types of tissues in our body. Today we've talked about epithelial tissue, and we'll go over the other 3 types in our future lessons.